Thank you for coming. I should warn you, we have watched the Labour manifesto launch yesterday, so if any of you ask any hostile questions, you'll be heckled by armies of Liberal Democrats. You can't say that we don't learn from what other parties do. In our manifesto tomorrow, you will see that we have a new approach, and we'll be setting out a new approach to the economy. An economy which must become financially sustainable, based on equity, not debt, where we learn as a country to build things again, not just bet on things on computer screens in the City of London. But the problems in the British economy started with the banks, so the solution must start with the banks too. And that is what Vince and I would like to talk to you about this morning. The implosion in the British banking system was a classic example of a vested interest, a clique, one industry, holding a gun to the head of the rest of the British economy. Yet despite all the talk about cleaning up the banking system, all the elements are still in place for that implosion to happen all over again. Our view is we simply don't have the luxury as a country not to reform the banking system in this country from top to toe. Neither the Labour Party nor the Conservatives will really tackle the vested interests in the banking system. Yesterday, Labour said next to nothing on the subject. I predict today the Conservatives will say little more. They'll say, we're all in this together. In fact, under the Conservatives, you're on your own. They talk about a big society. In fact, what they want is a DIY society, where if you're a banker, you get off scot-free, and you only get tax breaks if you're a millionaire. That's why in the coming days, you'll see more details of our plans to reform the banking system in its entirety. We will tell you more about how we will enforce lending targets so that banks lend to viable British businesses. Without banks lending to viable British businesses, the money won't be circulating in the British economy. It's like a body without blood, and we will not be able to create the jobs that we need for the future. We will talk to you about our levy, of a 10% levy on the profits of banks until they are fully reformed. And we will talk to you about the structural separation between high-risk banking and retail banking, between investment banking and retail banking, that we think is absolutely necessary to ensure that never again are your everyday savings held hostage by the obscene greed and risk-taking by bankers in the City of London. But today, we want to talk to you specifically about something which continues to outrage, rightly, millions of people in this country, and that is bankers' bonuses. In our view, bankers must understand that raking in huge bonuses, subsidised directly and indirectly by taxpayers, while viable British businesses are being starved of cash, people are losing their jobs, homes are being repossessed, is morally obscene. And that is why today we are unveiling 5 proposals to bring the bonus culture in banking finally under control. First, there should be no cash bonuses over £2,500. Bonuses must only be paid out in shares redeemable after 5 years, with a special clause so they can't be traded off or used as security in the meantime. Second, no bonuses at all at board level. We're not saying that directors of banks shouldn't be well paid, pay them lots of money, give them free entry to the golf club, but don't pay them bonuses which distort their judgments as the people responsible for the business strategy of their banks, and ensure instead that they only have the long-term interests of those banks at heart. Third, no rewards for failure. We will extend the Financial Services Act so that banks which are making a loss cannot pay discretionary bonuses at all. It's simple. If you're not making money, you don't pay out bonuses. It's just common sense. Fourth, total transparency. We will require the publication of the names of all bank staff that have salaries and bonuses that are greater than that of the Prime Minister, just under £200,000. And we will require the FSA to publish its assessment of all banks' pay policy so shareholders and the public, because it is the public, after all, which either owns these banks outright or indirectly subsidises them, can find out where the problems and where the excess exists. Fifth and finally, we will hold directors to account. It's all very well, the FSA, being able to rule against a bank's pay policy, but we want to bring responsibility home to the directors themselves, in their own pockets. Directors of banks will be personally fined if their institution breaks the code of practice on pay. We believe these 5 steps will transform the culture of greed that continues to disfigure the banking system in this country. Of course, a healthy financial sector is crucial to the long-term sustainability and growth of the British economy. But we cannot have a sustainable, growing British economy as long as the incentives in the banking system are still aimed at lining the pockets of bankers and not providing loans at reasonable rates to British households and to British businesses. We quite simply want to see the banking system become the servant, not the master, of the British economy. Vince.
Thank you, Nick. I mean, I just want to start by just reiterating the point Nick made at the very beginning as to why we're talking about this subject. I mean, we've had a week talking about side issues, important in themselves, national insurance contributions, but not central. I mean, the central issue is that we are still in a major economic disaster. The country is now 5% poorer than it was before the banking crash and the recession that followed it. And what we're on is how we manage the aftermath of that crisis and how we prevent it happening again. And an important part of that issue is how you deal with bonuses. This is an issue that isn't going to go away. The government had a temporary tax which has now ceased. We know that the banks are already preparing their bonus strategies for the next quarter. We will hear the results of it before the election, but it's still an issue that's very much with us. It matters. It matters because we're not here talking about incentive payments in other industries. We're talking about payments which are either directly made by the taxpayer in state-owned banks, or in the case of private banks that are underwritten by the taxpayer, something that's effectively insured and protected by the taxpayer. So we have a direct interest as the public in bonus payments. It's also important because these are the means by which the banks create what in the industry is called systemic risk. Andrew Haldane, who's executive director of the Bank of England, made a very good speech a few weeks ago in which he drew an analogy between the car industry and the banking industry. And the car industry, like the banking industry, does a lot of very useful things. You know, cars are very useful, banks are very useful, but they also produce pollution. And the pollution caused by the banking industry is systemic risk. And you need a combination of taxes and regulation to deal with it, just as you deal with pollution in the car industry. And we're talking this morning about some of the regulatory mechanisms by which we deal or propose to deal with the bonus problem. Nick's enumerated 5 specific points, but let me just develop the context behind them. One particular one I would highlight is transparency. It's a very important principle in corporate law that shareholders, and in this case we're talking also about the public as shareholders, have a right to know what's happening in their companies, and which is why directors have to declare their remuneration. And in the case of banking, we want well-paid employees, not just at director board level, to have their payments disclosed. The Walker report a few weeks ago sniffed around this problem but backed off what I think had been an earlier recommendation that they should be publicly individually declared. And we want to have that actually put in place.